Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. What a treat. We are welcoming Tom Bishop, longtime station manager here at WNPQ, newly retired. First of all, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
And thanks for taking some time on, a day off to come on in.
Well, thanks for having me.
Tom, you were celebrating 50 years of being in the radio industry. It's rare to find anyone who does 50 years of anything, put together 50 years of paid work, let alone 50 years in one business. This is what we want to talk about because you have contributed so much to our community through that time. Let's go back. So you obviously were like, 2 or 3 when you guys started?
Well, almost, yes. I'll give you my history and then we'll go from there. But
yeah.
My radio career started when I was 5 years old.
5, wow.
Well, maybe not, but that's when I first got interested.
But that's when you're saying.
Yeah, that's when I first remember radio, and my mom would have the radio on all during the day. And I remember in the morning from 9 until 10, and you might even remember this guy, Arthur Godfrey.
Oh, yes.
He had a variety show
yes.
on CBS Radio. I remember hearing that, and that's one of the memories I have at that age. I'm really going to date myself now because
it's okay.
This goes back to the mid-'50s.
That's okay.
And back then, radio soap operas were still on the air.
Right.
Well, every afternoon at 1 o'clock, Young Dr. Malone came on. And I remember The Adventures of Young Dr. Malone. And then at 1:30, The Adventures of Ma Perkins.
Right.
And I remember that show. And I remember back then you'd have the organ between scenes. You'd hear the organ, It was just, I just remember that, and that's kind of what got me started, my interest in radio. And then when I got a little bit older, I listened to Johnny Andrews on WHLO in the afternoon when I got home from school. And I remember saying, I'd kind of like to do what he does.
Do that. And you were how old at that point?
I was probably maybe 11 or 12,
yes.
maybe 10 or 11, something like that. But I remember hearing him.
I remember Story Hour.
Your Story Hour?
Yes.
Uncle Dan?
Yes.
That's right. I remember that one too.
Oh, yeah. That was, and then it was nap time as soon as that was over. So I was always bummed when it was done.
Yes, I remember that show as well. And every night at 7 o'clock, whenever this was again mid to late 50s, before Andy Griffith started his TV show on CBS Radio, he had a 15-minute comedy segment.
He was
a live audience.
Yes.
He was on radio. That's kind of how he got his start.
You can actually go to YouTube and get some of those recordings.
Yes.
Maybe not necessarily what was on radio, but some of his record recordings, and hilarious.
That's right. So he was one of the memories that I've got.
Yes.
And then the news commentator, Lowell Thomas and CBS News. He was on every day. So just,
so
back
you got
then,
the bug.
Yes, that's where I first got the interest in radio. And
did you used to grab a hairbrush and practice?
Well, I did. It wasn't a hairbrush. I'll tell you what it was. It was actually the faucet of a kitchen sink. That looked like a microphone.
Yes.
And I kind of used that.
Yes, would have the cord too.
And I would play radio, pretend, and it was those were just good days.
That's fun. A lot of people have a dream, but not all of them turn into the real thing.
Yeah.
How did you actually get hired your first time?
Well, and I'll get to that
in
a second. But
there's
one more
first.
One more memory that I've got. And this was back in the days where radio stations would have block programming. They would have different music, different programming at different times of the day. Mm-hmm. Every afternoon at 5:30 on WHBC, they would play Mitch Miller and the Gang.
Oh, my goodness.
For a half hour of Mitch Miller and the Gang music at 5:30 in the afternoon drive.
Yes.
And Skip Horniak, if you remember him.
I know Skip Horniak.
He was the host, and that was in the early 60s.
Right.
So that tells you, how things have changed on radio. You would never think of Mitch Miller and the Gang being on a 5:30 in the afternoon drive, but that's the way it was back then. You'd have different programming.
When that transitioned to television, they would have Follow the Bouncing Ball, and my mother would make us watch it, and we'd all have to sing along with Mitch, and that's what it was called.
Mitch. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, you're dating us both, so that's okay.
That's right.
But they are good memories. It was fun times. So eventually you got a job in radio.
I graduated from school and went to radio school in 68.
Where did you go?
I went to Career Academy in Columbus, and they specialized in radio and TV. And so I went to radio school there. And part of what you had to do back then as an announcer, you had to get your third class radio license. So they prepared me for that. And I drove to Cleveland and went to the Federal Building, and you took the test, and I passed that, and I got my third class. And then about a week before we graduated, my instructor took me aside and said, there's a station in Dover that has an opening, and that might be one you might want to take a look at. So after I graduated, I called them and talked to their program director, and I remember his name, John Schoen was his name, and I came in and did the interview with him. He hired me. So a week and one day after I graduated, that was my very first day at a radio station.
Out of high school out of radio school.
But barely out of high school, yes.
Right. Okay, now radio, you kind of want to have a nice voice. At what point weren't you saying as your voice changed, oh, thank heavens, I have a radio voice?
Well, when I started, I mean, when you're young, you just don't realize.
You sound like that, though. You sound like you sound like.
Yeah, but you don't know what you don't know when you're that age.
I guess
and
true.
I was very weak, but I learned a lot and developed over the years. But I do thank John for giving me that first job in radio.
Absolutely.
And
What was that first job?
Yeah, it was a very educational experience because I started out as the evening announcer from 6 until midnight. But the thing is, I learned a lot because, again, stations back then would have different block programming during the day. Well, every morning from 10 to 11, they had a polka show on that station sponsored by businesses in Sugar Creek. And when the host of that show would go on a vacation, guess who got to do the polka show? I did. I got to step in and learned about polka music and some of the businesses in Sugar Creek area. So I got to do that. And then on Sunday night, they had a classical music show called Forever Yours. Well, when that host of that show would go on a vacation, I got to step in and host that show. And I was the only announcer at that point that knew anything about classical music at the station. It's only because I had learned that in radio school. So I got to do that, and that was kind of fun and educational. So I learned a little bit about classical music.
So you're really getting a lot of on-the-job training.
Yes.
And without too much risk, because you could step in, fill in, kind of learn your way around, and then try something else.
Yeah.
Did you have a preference, polka or classical?
No, not really. I mean, I grew to like both. You know, I didn't know a whole lot about those styles of music, but I grew to like them by hosting the show. Well, those are the two that I remember, okay? And then I was able to do, that's what it was, big band. When I first started there, they had a big band format, and they would play big band music by Les and Larry Elgart and Glenn Miller and the band, and also Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, that style of music.
Wow.
So I learned a lot about that music as well. So it was just an educational time at that station.
I think of you so connected with Christian music. Now, you probably have a lot of things you have to tell me between that first job and when you first started getting into Christian radio. So take us there and get us into how you started getting so involved in Christian music and bringing Christian music to our area.
Well, I left, it was WJER in Dover, that was the station. Then I left there in 72 and got the job here in Canton with WTOF 98.1.
Right.
And the station engineer at that time was Dave Johnson, and Dave actually hired me to work at WTOF, and I started there on the midnight shift. So I worked several years on that shift, but one of my duties then was to produce a program called Music Time that the owner, Jack Mortensen, would host every day. It was on every night, an hour program from 6 until 7, Monday through Friday. My duty was to put that program together. He would come in, record the inserts, and I would pick out the music. And the music would be according to what he would be talking about, the subject matter. And that was fun. It was fun putting that program together and then duplicating those programs because it was on 6 other stations in the company at that time.
Right.
Different parts of the country. And so that was good. It was a fun time, and I was able to produce that program and send it out to the other stations. And from time to time, again, when he would be on a vacation, guess who got to host it? I did. So I got to host Music Time, and my voice was able to be heard on those other stations around the country. So that was a fun time, too.
And what a responsibility to actually get to choose what music to drive home the message that he was trying to drive home.
I learned a lot from that. It was really fun to find just the right song that would have to do with his devotional that he would present. And it was a good time, and I enjoyed doing that. And then I worked on that shift for several years, but then the program director position became open, and I became the program director. And then in '83, the manager left, and I became the manager of the station. So I just kind of, as the years went on, I just kind of moved up a bit. And I was the manager there for 13 years. And that's where I first got my start in managing Christian radio. And as I was an announcer there for several years, I learned a lot about the Christian music. At that time, they played a lot of Southern gospel. I learned a lot about that. I didn't know a lot about it. So it was, again, educational time, and I enjoyed my time there. And then in '96, the Mortensen Company sold WTOF and WHLO, and then I worked for Salem for a couple years.
Right.
And went up there, actually drove to Cleveland and did that for a few years until the opportunity here at this station, 95.9, came open in '99, and then I became the manager, and I've been that ever since until now.
Till stepping away and passing the torch.
Right.
You've gotten to see so many changes in radio through the years. It's probably not even the same business as when you first
Well,
stepped
when
in.
I first started, we were playing records, 33s and 45s on turntables. And I remember putting the record on the turntable and getting it ready, queuing it up, ready to put on the air. And and that's what I started out with, playing music on. And then we would play our commercials on cartridges, which are similar to like 8-tracks back then, if anybody remembers those. They were similar to 8-tracks, and they were cartridges, and you would record the commercial onto the cartridges, and then you'd press the button and put it on the air. So that's what I grew up with in radio as far as the technical part of things. And then CDs came along, so we didn't play records anymore. It was all the music was on CDs. And then, now today, everything is in a computer. All the commercials, all the music, all on a computer.
You just push buttons. You must say to the kids today, you young whippersnappers, you don't even know what it's like to have to rewind a record just exactly the right amount so that you don't hear the
that's for sure.
and turn it on right when it's going full speed.
Yeah.
That had to be, how do you get that touch? I mean, I think someone who's not familiar with that's got to be saying, they did what?
Well, you practice it, In fact, I learned that in radio school. I mean, it wasn't difficult. You just learned how to do it.
Because you have two. You have one on each side.
Yeah,
And as
exactly.
one's stopping, you're starting up the next.
That's exactly right, yeah. And some of the announcers sometimes would do that so much, queuing up that record, that it would kind of create like a burn within the record. And that was not good, because you would start the record, you hear that little shush on the air. And but some guys were known to do that, and then you had to get another record because, the record would be ruined eventually. So just one of the memories.
Yeah, vinyl's making a comeback.
Yes, it is.
What do you think of that?
It's okay, but I don't know if it'll last. I think it's kind of a fad, because the quality, I don't think. Now, it might be different today. I don't know. I haven't seen the newer records, but the quality, I would think, would not be as good as it would be digital, yeah.
Right. No, I think it's not as good, and I think that's what they like about it.
And maybe that is. That's right, yeah. But you're right. It is making a comeback, yeah.
Were you always a believer the whole time you were working in Christian radio?
Yes, when my family took me to church my whole life, I became a Christian. I accepted Jesus when I was about 14, I think. It was when I really went up and took the invitation that night, accepted the invitation that night, went up, and then became baptized that night. So I was about that age when I became a Christian, But then I wasn't a strong Christian at that point. It wasn't until I started the WTOF that I started to really understand everything, I think, yeah.
Getting involved and getting to listen every day to Christian music has got to do something about feeding the soul. Can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure, and especially some of the new songs out now with contemporary Christian. Their message is so good, and right, no other style of music can have that. They can encourage you like that, and just sometimes I hear a song just whenever I need to hear a message like that, and there it is. So that's what Christian music can do for the soul, I think.
I bet you've heard that from others as well.
Yes.
That, I was having a horrible day, and I turned on your station, and you were playing just the right song. Have you had those kinds of confirmations?
Yes, I've heard that many times over the years, yeah.
You've got to have met so many great people. Oh, you know what, Tom? I just looked over at the time.
Okay.
And because you're still the boss in my eyes, you're going to want me to be on time here. So Let's take a short break, listen to some words from our sponsors, and we'll be back with Tom Bishop after these words. You're listening to Our Community.